My name is Mildred Morita, and I'm 32 years old. I didn't grow up believing I was special. No one ever sat me down and told me I wasn't. But when you spend your childhood watching praise flow freely towards someone else while stopping just short of you, you don't need it spelled out. You learn it in the pauses, in the lowered expectations, in the way your achievements are acknowledged like facts, not victories. Still, somehow I built a life I'm proud of. I work as a mechanical engineer for a mid-sized aerospace company in Arizona, designing components for commercial aircraft. Parts most passengers will never see, but trust with their lives anyway. I earned both my bachelor's and master's degrees on full scholarship, not because anyone pushed me, but because I learned early that if I wanted security, freedom, or respect, I would have to earn it myself. The job pays well, around $145,000 a year before bonuses. I genuinely love what I do, not just because it's intellectually challenging, but because engineering is fair in a way my family never was. The math works or it doesn't. The structure holds or it fails. No favoritism. No golden children. 5 years ago, I bought my dream car, a 2018 Porsche 911 Carrera, Guards Red, manual transmission. I paid cash. 3 years of saving, no loans, no shortcuts. That car wasn't about status. It was proof. Proof of late nights studying while classmates partied. Proof of internships that barely paid rent. Proof of ramen dinners, secondhand furniture, and choosing discipline when no one was watching. I hand-washed it every weekend. Only microfiber towels, pH-balanced soap. The interior was detailed quarterly. It lived in a climate-controlled garage under a cover. The odometer barely passed 18,000 miles because I treated it like it mattered. Because it did. Every time I drove it, I felt something rare and fragile. Pride. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that comes from surviving without a safety net. And yes, my family matters to this story. I'm the older sister. My younger sister, Lena, is 4 years younger than me and has been the golden child since the day she was born. I'm not exaggerating. My mom has a baby book for Lena that's 3 times thicker than mine. Every milestone Lena hit was celebrated like a miracle. First steps, first words, first time using the bathroom alone. Meanwhile, I could bring home straight A's, and my dad would glance at the report card and ask if I'd finished mowing the lawn. Lena was the athletic one. Varsity sports in high school, even though she spent more time on the bench than on the field. My parents never missed a game. They booked hotels, made weekend trips out of it, invited extended family like it was a championship event. Meanwhile, I was in robotics club. We won state championships, built an autonomous robot from scratch. Our team photo made the local paper. My parents came to 0 competitions. When we qualified for nationals in California, my team fundraised for months to afford the trip. Car washes, bake sales, sponsorship letters. I asked my parents if they'd consider coming. Lena's season was already over. My dad said California was too expensive for a hobby competition. My mom said she had to help Lena move into her dorm that weekend. Her semester didn't start for another month. They just didn't want to come. College made the favoritism impossible to ignore. I earned a full ride to Arizona State for engineering. You'd think my parents would be proud. My dad's reaction? Well, at least we don't have to pay for it. That was it. Lena got into a mediocre state school on a partial athletic scholarship, maybe 30%. My parents covered the rest. Tuition, housings, meal plans, textbooks, spending money. Roughly $120,000 over 4 years. She majored in communications, which mostly meant partying and showing up to class just enough to pass. She graduated with a 2.7 GPA and no job lined up. I graduated summa cum laude with multiple job offers before I even walked across the stage. Guess whose graduation got the big family party with 50 guests? Not mine. After college, I moved to Phoenix for work. Bought a modest house. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I fixed it up myself on weekends. New kitchen, refinished floors, landscaped the yard. My parents visited twice in 5 years. Lena bounced between jobs, never lasting more than a few months anywhere. Every time something didn't work out, she moved back in with my parents. Rent-free. Laundry done. Meals cooked. Every failure softened. Every excuse accepted. When I was in grad school, working part-time and barely sleeping, my car broke down. I asked my parents to borrow $1,500 to cover the repair. My dad said, "Part of being an adult is handling your own problems." So I did. That was the moment something shifted in me. I stopped expecting support, stopped hoping they'd show up differently. I focused on building a life that didn't require their approval. And it worked. Career, house, friends, independence, peace. Then I met Daniel. And for the first time in my life, it felt like I'd built something that was completely mine, untouched by family dynamics, favoritism, or quiet resentment. I should have known better. Because in my family, anything good eventually gets taken. I met Daniel 3 years ago at a charity gala my company sponsors every spring. It was one of those events I usually avoided: overpriced tickets, underseasoned food, and people congratulating each other for writing checks they could easily afford. I only went because my manager had strongly encouraged it after my promotion to senior engineer. Visibility mattered, apparently. Daniel wasn't flashy. No loud laugh, no peacocking. He stood near the bar, nursing a drink and watching the room like he was cataloging personalities instead of hunting for attention. When our conversation started, it didn't feel forced. He asked what I did, then actually listened to the answer. That alone felt rare. He worked in project management for a commercial construction firm. Stable job. No ego about it. When I talked about aircraft components, he didn't glaze over or pretend to understand. He asked thoughtful questions. When I mentioned I drove a Porsche, he didn't whistle or joke about midlife crises. Instead, he asked, "What made you choose that one?" No one had ever asked me that before. Our first date was supposed to be coffee. It turned into 4 hours and a closed cafe. The second date was takeout and a movie at my place. By the third, he was helping me replace a flickering hallway light, standing on a stepladder in socked feet like he'd always belonged there. Dating Daniel felt effortless. He didn't need expensive restaurants or constant stimulation. He was happy with quiet nights, home projects, shared routines. He admired the Porsche, but never assumed he'd drive it. When I finally offered, 6 months in, he treated it like glass, adjusted the seat carefully, asked before changing radio stations, parked it far away from other cars. It wasn't about the car. It was about respect. We talked about everything: childhoods, goals, fears. He told me about parents who showed up even when they didn't understand. I told him about robotics competitions nobody attended, about paying my own way through college, about learning not to expect applause. He didn't minimize it, didn't try to reframe it into something more comfortable. He just listened. After a year, we moved into a rhythm that felt solid, predictable in the best way. When he proposed, it didn't feel like a leap. It felt like a natural next step. But before that, I introduced him to my family. That was where the cracks started forming. Dinner was at my parents' house. I'd warned Daniel ahead of time about Lena, about the favoritism, about my mom's tendency to overstep. I told him it wouldn't be a big deal. Just food, small talk, then we'd leave. The moment we walked in, my mom's expression shifted. Not welcoming, assessing. She hugged Daniel longer than necessary, asked him about his job in detail, complimented his posture, his manners, the way he spoke. When I mentioned a recent raise at work, my dad nodded once and redirected the conversation back to Lena's latest job idea. Lena barely acknowledged me. But she watched Daniel. Throughout dinner, my mom kept rearranging seats, asking Daniel to sit closer, pulling him into side conversations while my dad peppered me with surface-level questions he clearly didn't care about. I noticed. I just didn't want to believe it meant anything. After that night, Lena started texting me more often. Asked if Daniel liked hiking, if he drank red or white wine, if we were serious. I answered politely, even happily. I told myself maybe she was trying to connect. Then my parents started calling more. Weekly dinners, insisting Daniel come every time, acting like it was important, like they were finally interested in my life. At those dinners, Lena always sat next to Daniel. If someone else claimed the spot first, my mom would subtly rearrange things, always with a smile, always with an excuse. Daniel mentioned it once, quietly, on the drive home. "Your family is intense," he said. I laughed it off, told him he was imagining things. I wish I'd listened. A few months later, Daniel proposed. He asked my parents' permission, planned it carefully, took me to the botanical garden where we'd had our first long conversation. He got down on one knee with a ring that felt like it had been designed for me. Not flashy, not minimal, just right. I said yes without hesitation. I'd never been happier. The engagement party was at my house. Low-key, close friends, family, about 30 people, catered food, nothing extravagant. Lena showed up alone. She hovered the entire night, refilling Daniel's drink, laughing too loudly at his jokes, touching his arm when she spoke. My friends noticed. I noticed. I told myself she was just being awkward, that I was overthinking, that I didn't want to be the kind of person who saw threats everywhere. After that, Daniel started acting different. Not obviously, just enough to register if you were paying attention. More time on his phone, smiling at messages he wouldn't explain, canceling plans last minute, saying work was stressful, saying wedding planning overwhelmed him. When I asked if everything was okay, he said yes. I believed him. My parents ramped up the family dinners, always including Daniel, always positioning Lena nearby, always pulling my attention away with questions they didn't really care about. Looking back, it feels orchestrated. Late May, Daniel told me he needed to visit a client site out of town for the weekend. Important project. Couldn't be rescheduled. That same night, Lena texted saying she was going away with friends. I stayed home, cleaned the garage, sorted old photos, tried to ignore the feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was my friend Derek. Please tell me this isn't what it looks like, the message read. He'd seen Lena and Daniel together, 2 cities away, holding hands, arriving at a restaurant in my Porsche. I felt the air leave my lungs. I called Daniel. Voicemail. Called Lena. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. That was the moment everything shifted. Not confusion, not disbelief. Clarity. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I sat on the concrete floor of my garage with my phone in my hand, staring at the empty space where my Porsche should have been. The absence felt louder than any alarm. I called Daniel again. Straight to voicemail. I called Lena. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. For a few seconds, maybe minutes, I tried to bargain with reality. Maybe Derek was mistaken. Maybe it wasn't my car. Maybe there was some explanation that didn't end with my world collapsing. Then I looked at the key hook by the door. Empty. That was when the shock gave way to something colder, sharper. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up, brushed the dust off my hands, and walked back into the house like someone moving underwater. My heart was pounding, but my mind felt eerily clear. I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher asked for my name, my address, the make and model of the vehicle. Her voice was calm, professional, so normal it felt surreal. My car has been taken without permission by a family member, I said. I know roughly where it is. She paused. Did you give them permission to use the vehicle? No, I said, never. She asked if I had proof of ownership. I told her the title was in my safe, the registration and insurance in my name. She said an officer would call me back. When the call came 20 minutes later, the officer asked me if I understood what filing a report meant, that this could result in felony charges, that it would involve my sister. Yes, I said, I understand. I texted him photos, dozens of them. The car from every angle, the license plate, the small scratch on the rear bumper I'd never bothered fixing. If there was any doubt, I wanted it erased. Then I waited. Every minute stretched. I kept checking my phone, even though I knew there wouldn't be new messages. My thoughts spiraled in loops. How long had this been going on? How stupid I'd been. How carefully everyone had played their roles. Around 11 p.m., the officer called back. They'd located the Porsche at a hotel 2 cities south. The vehicle was being towed to an impound lot. Lena was being detained for grand theft auto. Daniel was with her. Daniel was not being charged. I thanked the officer, hung up, and sat there in silence. I didn't cry until later. At that moment, all I felt was numb. The next morning, I drove down in my work truck. Seeing the Porsche in the impound lot felt like seeing something living that had been mistreated. Fast food wrappers shoved into the cup holders. The passenger seat pushed far forward. Mud smeared into the floor mats. My car had never looked like that. I paid the fees, signed the paperwork, and drove it straight to my detailer. Told him I wanted everything cleaned, shampooed, conditioned, and sanitized. And I don't want any trace of them left, I said. He nodded without asking questions. By the time I got home, my phone was already lighting up. Daniel left a voicemail first. His voice was shaky, apologetic, desperate. It's not what it looks like, he said. We were just talking. She borrowed the car because hers was low on gas. Nothing happened. Please call me. Every word felt like an insult. Lena called next, from a restricted number. You're overreacting, she said. I was going to bring it back. You didn't have to get the cops involved. I hung up without responding. Then my mom called. She was hysterical, crying so hard she could barely speak, saying I'd destroyed the family, saying Lena's bail was set at $50,000 and they didn't have that kind of money. All this over a car? she sobbed. I stayed calm. Told her Lena had stolen my vehicle and crossed county lines, that the consequences weren't my doing. She said Lena had made a mistake, that sisters forgive sisters. That family comes first. Did you know? I asked. The silence that followed was long enough to answer the question. You knew, I said. She started crying harder. Said she'd suspected something but didn't want to believe it. Said Lena had feelings and couldn't help herself. Said Daniel had confused her. I felt something inside me harden. She stole my car, I said, and slept with my fiancé. She didn't mean to hurt you, my mom insisted. One bad decision shouldn't ruin her whole life. Lena was 28 years old, not a child, not confused, a grown woman who'd made deliberate choices. I told my mom that actions had consequences, that this wasn't about punishment, it was about accountability. That was when her tone shifted. You've always been jealous of your sister, she said. You've always had to be better than her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I told her about the robotics competitions they never attended, about the scholarship they brushed off, about the $1,500 I'd been denied when I was drowning. This isn't jealousy, I said. This is the first time Lena doesn't get rescued. She called me cruel, said family doesn't send family to jail. I told her family also doesn't steal from you and betray you and expect immunity. Then I hung up. My dad called next. Same arguments. Same fear about Lena's future. Same concern for everyone except me. I asked him if he remembered telling me adults handle their own problems. This is her problem now, I said. Then the extended family joined in. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Not one asked how I was doing. Every call ended the same way. Family first. Forgiveness. Mistakes happen. I blocked everyone except my parents. Not because I hoped they'd change, but because I wanted proof, later, that I'd tried. That night, Daniel showed up at my house. I'd changed the locks that morning. He stood on the porch ringing the doorbell, knocking, pleading. I watched him through the security camera. No shoes, tear-streaked face, apologies spilling out faster than he could control them. He said it was a mistake, that Lena had pursued him, that he'd been confused, that he loved me, that we could fix it. I didn't open the door. I watched until he finally gave up and left. And that was the moment I knew. Whatever came next, I wasn't going back. The morning after Daniel showed up at my door, I woke up feeling strangely calm. Not peaceful, not healed, just clear. Like something heavy I'd been carrying for years had finally dropped. And even though the impact hurt, I could stand up straighter without it. That calm didn't last. By noon, my phone started ringing again. It was my mother. I let it ring the first time, and the second, and the third. Eventually, I answered. Not because I wanted to talk to her, but because I was done letting her words live in my head without hearing them out loud. She didn't bother with hello. They're saying Lena could be charged with a felony, she said, her voice tight with panic. Do you understand what that means? Yes, I replied. I do. This is going too far, Mildred. You've made your point. You don't need to ruin her entire life. There it was again. Not our family, not my engagement, not my betrayal. Just Lena. I told her the prosecutor had already filed the charges. Grand theft auto, crossing county lines. The value of the vehicle alone made it serious. She said I could still help, that I could call the prosecutor, ask them to reduce it, ask for leniency. She's your sister, she said. Family is family. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the kitchen counter. You didn't say that when she slept with my fiancé, I said. That was complicated, my mother snapped. She was confused. She felt overshadowed. You've always been so independent. You don't know what it's like to feel second best your whole life. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, did you ever stop to think that maybe I became independent because I had no other choice? Silence. I told her that Lena hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd stolen from me. Used something I worked years for like it was hers by default. She didn't steal, my mother argued. She borrowed it. She took it without permission, I said. That's the definition of stealing. My mother's voice hardened. You're being vindictive. That word landed differently than all the others. Because vindictive meant she thought this was about revenge, not about years of being dismissed, not about being told to be the bigger person while watching my sister be protected from every consequence. I told her she was wrong. This wasn't revenge. This was me finally refusing to clean up Lena's mess. She started crying again. Loud, gasping sobs that felt designed to pull me back into the role I'd always played, the one who smoothed things over, the one who sacrificed quietly. Please, she begged. I'm asking you as your mother. I felt something in my chest tighten. You've never asked me like this before, I said. You've never begged for me." She didn't deny it. That afternoon, my father called. He was calmer, more controlled. That somehow made it worse. He told me I was being short-sighted, that a felony conviction would follow Lena forever, that no employer would look past it, that I was destroying her future over a car. I reminded him of the time I asked to borrow $1,500 during grad school. "You told me adults handle their own problems," I said. "So this is Lena handling hers." He said that was different. It always was. He asked me if I wanted to be responsible for my sister going to prison. "I didn't put her in this position," I said. "She did." Then the extended family came out of the woodwork. Aunt May called to lecture me about forgiveness. Uncle Ron sent a long text about how blood was thicker than water. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions about my character. Not one person asked how I was doing. Not one person asked what it felt like to lose my fiancé and my sister in the same night. They all wanted the same thing, for me to make it easier for everyone else. When my aunt suggested I was overreacting emotionally, something in me snapped. I asked her if she'd say the same thing if her husband had cheated with her sister and stolen her car. She didn't answer. I blocked her. I blocked most of them. I left my parents unblocked, not out of hope, but because I wanted there to be no doubt later that I hadn't disappeared without warning. Midweek, the prosecutor's office contacted my lawyer. Yes, I had hired one. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I wanted to make sure the process was clean, that there would be no backroom pressure, no emotional manipulation slipping through the cracks. The plea deal was straightforward. 3 years of supervised probation, full restitution for impound and detailing fees, 200 hours of community service, permanent felony on Lena's record. The alternative was trial and potential prison time. My lawyer asked me what I wanted to do. "I want her to understand that actions have consequences," I said. "No negotiations." That night, my mother called again. She'd found out about the plea deal. She was frantic. "Please," she said, "I'm begging you. Ask them to make it a misdemeanor. She won't survive this." I thought about the girl who stole my car, who smiled at family dinners while sleeping with my fiancé, who cried when she got caught, not when she hurt me. "She'll survive," I said. "She just won't be protected anymore." "You're being cruel," my mother whispered. "This isn't the daughter I raised." "You're right," I replied. "The daughter you raised would have let this go. She doesn't exist anymore." She hung up. Lena accepted the plea deal 2 days later. When I heard, I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. Relieved, but tired. Because standing up for yourself doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels lonely. And in that loneliness, I finally understood something I'd spent my whole life missing. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who don't ask you to bleed for their comfort. The day Lena was sentenced, I didn't go to court. That surprises people when they hear the story. They expect anger, satisfaction, a front row seat to justice. But by that point, I'd already grieved the version of my sister I thought I had. Sitting in a courtroom wouldn't have given me closure. It would have reopened something I was finally letting scar over. My lawyer called me afterward. 3 years of supervised probation, full restitution for the impound fees and detailing, 200 hours of community service, a permanent felony record for grand theft auto, and a court order requiring her to stay at least 500 feet away from me at all times. The judge called the plea deal lenient, given the circumstances. I hung up and sat quietly at my kitchen table for a long time. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, and then slowly lighter. My mother called that night. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was hoarse, exhausted, stripped of its usual certainty. "He took the deal," she said. "I hope you're happy." I deleted it without replying. That was the last message I ever heard from her. My parents haven't spoken to me since sentencing. No calls, no texts, just Christmas cards every December, mailed like obligations instead of gestures. I throw them away unopened. Daniel tried harder. He showed up again a week after Lena accepted the plea deal. This time, he didn't knock. He stood at the edge of my driveway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to exist in the same space as me. I didn't go outside. He sent emails instead. Long ones. Apologies stacked on excuses. He said Lena pursued him, that he'd been confused, that wedding stress had messed with his head, that it was never supposed to go that far. I never replied. Some explanations don't deserve acknowledgement. I canceled the wedding that same week. Venue, caterer, photographer, DJ, florist. I lost about $15,000 in deposits. I didn't care. Daniel, wasn't the one who reached out first after that. His parents did. They were mortified, apologized profusely, offered to reimburse what they'd contributed, told me they were ashamed of their son. I told them the truth, that while I appreciated their kindness, their son's choices weren't their responsibility. That was the last adult conversation I ever had about that relationship. Lena moved back in with my parents. She lost her real estate job when the background check flagged her felony. Then another job. Then another. Turns out employers aren't sympathetic when your criminal record involves theft of a luxury vehicle. She started doing gig work, delivery apps, temporary contracts, nothing that required trust. From what I heard, she told anyone who would listen that I'd overreacted, that I'd always hated her, that I'd trapped her by flaunting my success. The narrative was familiar. I stopped listening. Extended family members tried one last time. A cousin cornered me at Home Depot months later between plywood sheets and bags of concrete, told me my parents were heartbroken, that Lena was struggling, that enough time had passed and I should forgive and move on. I looked at him and said calmly, "Time doesn't erase betrayal. Forgiveness requires remorse and change. Neither has happened." Then I paid for my supplies and walked away. That moment felt strangely good. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just clean. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. Healing isn't a straight line. Some nights I still replayed conversations in my head, wondering if there had been a way to stop everything sooner. But something fundamental had shifted. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped shrinking to keep others comfortable. And slowly, my life filled with people who didn't require that version of me. About a year later, I met someone new. Not at a gala, not through family, just through friends. Low pressure, no expectations. He was steady, thoughtful, comfortable with silence, the kind of man who didn't get defensive when I said no, and didn't need to be reassured when I set boundaries. The first time I told him the full story, he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he just said, "That must have been incredibly lonely." And for the first time, I felt fully seen. A few weeks ago, we were at a dealership, killing time while his car was being serviced. The sales associate recognized my Porsche and started talking about trade-in deals. A newer 911, more horsepower, track-ready suspension. Objectively, it was a good offer. I walked out to the parking lot and looked at my car. Still immaculate, still mine. Just crossed 35,000 miles. Still represents every sacrifice I made to get here. "Maybe next year," I said. "This one has history." He smiled. He gets it. Lena is still legally required to stay away from me. My parents are still waiting for an apology that will never come. Daniel is out there somewhere, probably telling a version of the story where he's the victim. None of that matters anymore. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about boundaries, about self-respect, about what happens when the person who was always expected to bend finally stands still. I didn't lose my family. I stopped carrying people who never carried me back. And every time I turn the key in my Porsche and hear the engine come to life, I'm reminded of something simple and powerful. I built this life myself. No one gets to take it from me.